A reading this morning from Luke's Gospel, the 16th chapter. Listen now, friends, for the word of the Lord. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth.' This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God." I don't know if the story is true or if I even want to believe it's true. But there's a story about a child, a boy who grew up in the country, whose family for facilities had an outhouse. And this boy hated the outhouse. It was hot when it was warm. It was cold when it was cold. It was not very pleasant. It smelled. And so he one day decided to take his frustration out on the outhouse. The outhouse was near a creek, and apparently one day the creek, because of some rain, had been swollen and was closer to the outhouse than normal, and he figured that was his chance. So he took a stick and was pushing against it, and then pushed and pushed with all his might. And finally he got the outhouse to topple over into the creek and float away. That night his father confronted him and said, "Someone pushed the outhouse into the creek today. It was you, wasn't it, son?" "Yes," the boy answered. The boy thought for a minute and replied, "Dad, we read in school today that George Washington chopped down a cherry tree, and he didn't get into trouble because he told the truth." And the father replied, "Well, son, George Washington's father wasn't in that cherry tree." You see, there are a lot of ways we can get ourselves into trouble. Jesus tells a parable about a manager who's on his way out. The parable says, Jesus says, this manager had been squandering his boss's property, whatever that looks like in that case, but we can picture it. And so he has a short period of time, his boss has told him, you can't be my manager anymore. In other words, you're fired. So get your papers in order, get my books in order, and bring them to me, right? So he has a very limited period of time to get the books in order, which are not in order, and get them to the boss. Now the problem is, and this is, looking again at the parable, the way Jesus describes this manager, is he's both lazy and proud. It's kind of a dangerous combination, isn't it? Maybe we've found ourselves in life that way from time to time. But it does set one up for trouble when you want things and you want status, but you're not willing, to live into that. And so he does something clever, though. He figures out that, he figures if he tried to pilfer some of what was his manager's stuff, if he even had really access to it and hoard it away, he'd probably get discovered. But he does something really clever instead, doesn't he? He calls up the people that are his boss's business associates, people who owed his boss things. It says, how much do you owe the boss? Because I have the records here. Let's talk. And he cooks the books in their favor. I mean, if he's not going to be working for his boss anymore, he might as well have some others out there who will, have his interests in mind because he has theirs in mind. Do you follow me so far? Are you with me? Do you see what's happening here in the parable? And then we get to the really interesting part. The boss finds out about it. And oh boy, it's going to get interesting now, right? The words are going to fly. No. That's what I would expect to happen. The boss commends him. He says, you've acted shrewdly. Good for you. Doesn't make any sense, does it? I mean, I have read this parable over and over again. Every time I've gotten to that part and I'm confused, I know it's coming, it still doesn't really make any sense to me. What do we do with that? Well, maybe let's zoom out just a little bit. Maybe we can get some context here. First of all, Jesus is talking about money, right? Which is already confusing when you mix money and spiritual matters, right? Money can confuse us. It can cloud our vision. A parent was telling a story how they were trying to teach their children how to have money, how to save money wisely, what to spend it on, use it on, with discretion, right? And they use that envelope system that maybe you have used at times, either with your children or for yourself. When they gave their children allowances, they would put a portion of it in a give envelope and a save envelope and a gift envelope and spend and so forth and so on. And they were doing this, and this father says he thought it was working until one day he came home and he had a Band-Aid on his arm, and he had to tell his 6-year-old daughter why he had a Band-Aid, and it was because he was applying for some life insurance, and they had to do a medical examination for that, and he was explaining to her what life insurance was. And his sweet little 6-year-old daughter, and he says, well, life insurance is so if something happens to me, it would provide for $250,000. This was the sum used in his story. And apparently her eyes got really wide, and he said he was really worried about her. She has a tender heart. He knew that she would be worried. And she looked up to him and said, "A piece?" And he concludes, I'm not really sure the right lesson is getting communicated. See, because with money, it's hard for us to get the right lesson. It's hard for the right lesson to get communicated. That's because money confuses us in the first place. And by the way, no, you don't have to get nervous. This sermon really isn't about money. It's okay. But it does have a strange ability, doesn't it, to make plain our priorities, like what we spend our money on matters to us, right? But it also has the ability to confuse us. Yeah, that lesson Jesus is teaching about serving two masters. That's why you can't. It confuses us to try. It has such a strong pull on our hearts. I mean, we can be dedicated to a cause or to a lifestyle or to a posture of heart or to a concern, but money considerations can certainly complicate things and muddy the waters and divide our hearts, right? So right away, the parable's tricky. And Luke ends the parable right by having Jesus give us this lesson about not being able to serve God and money at the same time. It's muddy. And then we have these conventions, right, if you will, of reading the parables. I've always been a little bit confused how the master could commend this dishonest servant or manager. In part, I think, because a master in a parable is always supposed to be God, right? I mean, think of all the parables that you've heard that involve a father or a master or a king or somebody throwing a banquet. The person in charge we often take for being God. Whether it's the father and the prodigal son, or the owner of the unmerciful servant, or the one throwing the wedding banquet, or the landowner who's away and sends his son, or the landowner who calls people to work in his fields. In every case, the person in charge we take to be God. So if this boss is God, why would he commend a manager who's been dishonest? We're told time and time again in Scripture, God hates those who are dishonest. God hates those who are hypocrites. God hates those who claim to be one thing but are deceitful in something else. Those who take advantage of others. Those who take what isn't theirs. How do we understand this? How do we rectify it? And actually, I take comfort in the fact that there have been numerous theories over the years, because I'm not the only one who seems to struggle to get it. Maybe you have a theory that you've heard before or that you thought up on your own. It just goes to show that it's hard to decipher. You know, what is a true parable? Some people have said that, well, he was only giving away what was his commission. You see, in those days, apparently it was common that you would just get paid a portion of what somebody else would owe, and you'd collect it and bring it in. And so maybe that 50% or 20% that he forgave of those other people was just his. That's possible. We don't know. We're not told that. It's a guess. Or maybe it was the interest that they owed. I don't know about you. I don't know that would make the boss feel any less upset to not have the interest on what is owed him. I don't know. I find those explanations a little easy. But here's the thing, a parable is not supposed to be easy. Parable comes to us from the words para and bole, meaning para means comparison, parallel, we get from the same root word, right? And bole, which is like to throw, okay? So we're throwing these things together, and we're hoping that they give us some forward momentum, some motion, some understanding in a direction. But we're throwing these strange things together that don't fit. You've got a lazy manager who squanders a property, who gets it together just long enough to make some friends. And you've got a boss who commends him for it. These are things thrown together that doesn't seem to follow. So how else can we make sense of it? Well, one scholar, and I like this theory, says it has something to do with the nature of the description of the manager. Yes, initially he was lazy and proud, as we said, but he proves himself to be shrewd, and the word that's used for shrewd can also be understood to be urgent. You see, yeah, maybe he was wasteful and maybe he had been lazy and dishonest, and he's still going to be fired, mind you. That's not going to change. But at least he seems to appreciate all of this and appreciates the pickle he's gotten himself into, and he does something urgently. Jesus never claims this shrewd but dishonest servant is anything like a child of the light. In fact, he says he's a child of this age. But he seems to be impressed at the fact that he's urgent about something. He's not just sitting around waiting for circumstances to work themselves out. It would also seem in his urgency, the master thinks it's pretty clever because, again, he didn't try to get a hold of something and hoard it for himself, but he shared it with the others who would become his friends, right? And I think that's the key for me. You see, he could just, I'm sure it was tempting, right, to just smash and grab, take and hide. I mean, maybe just abscond with everything he could get a hold of and run away. But he restrains those urges, and he does something wiser, dishonest still, but wiser. It seems to me Jesus is telling us too that we've been given something that doesn't belong to us. And we should be as clever as people like this. We should be that wise with what we have that isn't ours. Don't hoard it. Don't clutch it and try to hide it or bury it in the ground. But give it away. Share it. Make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth. What's our dishonest wealth? Yeah, it could be money. The theory, and the belief, not just a theory, the theology that everything belongs to God. But I think it's even more than that. It's something theologians called unmerited favor. Unmerited favor. Unmerited as in we haven't earned it, it doesn't belong to us. That's the theological definition, by the way, for the word grace. Grace. We don't deserve God's favor, but God gives us God's favor. God smiles upon us. God loves us and cares about us in ways that we don't deserve. Or I don't deserve. But God says we do. And so what do you do when you have something that doesn't belong to you but has been given to you generously? Temptation would be to hold on to it. Say, yeah, I'm in the club. I'm here. God likes me. I'm good with God. No. Share it. Make friends with it. Give it to others. Extend it out into the world. Give it away. And once again, Luke ends this parable with this warning that you can't serve two masters, so choose what you're going to do with what you've been given and in whose service it's going to be. You can serve the wealth and the powers of the world. You can serve our heavenly master, he says, but you better choose with some urgency, because as the song goes, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And if you lack urgency in doing it, the choice is made for you. So, what's the real wealth here? We can place our hope and our trust and center all our dreams around the commerce of the world or upon the grace of God. And money is not bad in and of itself. Jesus never said, by the way, that money is the root of all evil. He said money is a root of all kinds of evil. But as we said, it distracts us with all things glimmery and shiny. I think he's trying to show us that the true wealth is in relationship. It's in grace, which is the means to be in relationship with each other. Have you ever thought about how impossible it is really to be in relationship for those who are imperfect unless there's grace? If there isn't grace, how could you possibly be in relationship with somebody else? I don't know about you. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. There you have it. Unless we have grace for each other in that, it can't be done. And God has that grace for us. Unless God had grace for us and we have grace for each other, there'd be no relationship to have. So I don't know, it's just my theory, but I think that's the dishonest wealth Jesus was talking about. Grace. We don't deserve God's favor, but we have it. Let's give it away. Amen.